So my name's Pauline and I'm appearing on behalf of myself as a community advocate, hence the shirt change. I've also emailed in the link and the details for that core site where they're advertising the shale gas investment opportunities where the government's...
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
So that went up, there was one that went up in February and the latest was updated on the 1st of November, so just a few months ago, advertising Imperial Oil and Gas and those, there's a few of them listed there, so...
All right, thank you.
It's very concerning. Okay, now, on to what I'm speaking about today. So, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've reviewed the draft report and I can really appreciate all the work that went into compiling that report. It's very extensive. You've covered, I'm going off script a bit, you've covered so many aspects and angles and issues and things, and I commend the inquiry for all that work. So I've also found that the report creates more questions than it answers. You've made 120 recommendations in the report. Of those, there's some that I wholeheartedly support, such as the reversal of onus of proof. I think that's very important. Also, the recommendation where if a pastoralist has issues and goes to court, that they won't be held liable for the costs. That's another very important recommendation. There's other recommendations that I take great exception to, such as not granting the right of veto to landholders. I really feel that landholders should be able to have a say in what happens on their land, and a mandatory agreement is really no agreement at all. So there's also, on the whole, most of the recommendations are on the right track, but they don't all go far enough. One of the main things that I picked up in the recommendations, even the ones that I really liked, is they're all addressing production licences and the production stages, and they're not aimed towards the exploration stages. But there's really no difference between an exploratory well and a production well. They still drill down through the aquifers, they still pump the chemicals and the sand down to do their fracturing. So the conditions that apply to production should also apply to exploration. In many ways, an exploration well carries more risk than a production well because they're exploring, they're still learning. So the recommendations, pretty much all of them refer to that production level. They need to encompass the exploration level as well. The report identified 115 risks. And these risks are a significant concern. Reducing or mitigating a risk is not the same as eliminating the risk or making fracking safe. Defining low risk as people losing access to their water for 2 weeks is misleading. That to anybody is not a low risk going without their bore water for 2 weeks. If you were to ask anyone reliant on their bores for their bore water, I'm sure that going without bore water for a day is a major imposition. And, make good. How do you make good on that? Trucking water in is not a solution if your whole system is set up to run off your bore. So, saying things are low risk, I think we've got different definitions of what that low risk is. I'm sure many people have a different definition. So Territorians, we've clearly and repeatedly stated that any risk to our water is too great and unacceptable, and, you know, especially low risk, that is just as unacceptable as a high risk. It is still a risk. Many Territorians have been expressing to me their overwhelming disappointment over not having their staunch opposition to fracking recognised in the draft final report or in Coffee's social impact assessment. So many people have voiced their discontent and disillusionment with the inquiry due to this, and that's a shame because you guys have done a lot of work, you've done a lot of consulting, and you've been given a lot of feedback, and the fact that that wasn't included in the start of the report, chapter 2 and 3, is it, where you discuss what work you've done and what people have said. In the interim report, you spoke about the community's overwhelming opposition that you came across, and that was totally left out of this draft report.
That will be put back in.
Thank you, thank you.
I can tell you that right now. I agree. I entirely accept that criticism, and that will be put back in.
Yeah, it's such a shame. There's so many good things in the report, and you know, there is a lot of good things in the report, and that was just one blemish that so many people picked up on and felt was unfair. And it also put people off from wanting to participate in the inquiry, because it's like, you know, we've been to the consultations, or we've sent a submission, or we've done whatever they've done to contribute. Why should we bother doing it again if we weren't heard last time? Obviously not everyone feels like that. I'm here.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's great that it's going back in. Thank you very much. There's many more issues that I would have liked to have raised, but we'd probably be sitting here for days on end. So I'm going to focus on two topics, the topics of flooding and fracturing. So flooding, I've given you each a copy of this presentation so you can follow through with the maps that are in here. And the first map that I've got is map 1, which is from the report, just so that you can see, as you're looking at the other maps, where the boundaries of Beetaloo are. So as you know, as you're experiencing today, our annual rainfall is seasonal. It happens over the space of a couple of short months every year. So it leads to a very uneven weather map if you look at maps by season as opposed to an annual map. We have negligible rainfall in the dry season, and the wet season is extremely wet and results in pretty much all of the top end flooding. And you would have seen that as you were flying to Daily Waters. Did you fly or drive? Driving would have given you a more close to the ground experience. But, you know, flying over the top end for your recent consultations, you would have seen the extensiveness of what's underwater. So in the draft final report, you've got this map here, which is the annual map. And it shows that where the Beetaloo is that light blue colour. It's not really reflective of how a map would look like if you took a week of monsoonal weather. So in the monsoonal weather, you can see that in the Beetaloo region, there is quite a lot of rainfall. And that heavy rainfall from a week of monsoon weather is shown by the multiple weather warnings, storm warnings, flood warnings, thunderstorm warnings, wind warnings that occur in the wet season every year. It's not just that this year has been exceptionally wet, it is every year. I have driven through there with my kids and been stranded in towns like Dunmurra because you couldn't continue any further north and you have to stay at the roadhouse until the rains go down. So maps, sorry, I've lost my spot. So maps 14 to 13 are just the storm warnings and the flood warnings that I could find for this wet season. And as you can see, there is quite a few warnings that went out in that time. So I'll let you browse through them more at your leisure. Sorry, the printing's small. I tried to fit them to a page.
It's all right, thank you.
So these regular severe storms and floods that happen every wet season, every year pretty much, they cause their own issues. And these issues are also an annual occurrence. Roads become impassable, as I said, due to the water levels. Creeks go up, and not even where there are creeks, even flat areas and low areas of land become totally submerged in the wet season. And occasionally the road surface will even totally wash away. You know, the road will laminate and that whole top bitumen sheet will go. If you add to that the weight of trucks and road trains, they do major damage to our road surfaces in the wet season, just through the weight of them over the wet underlying surface of the roads. This will make access to the wells and to the infrastructure for inspections almost impossible. It will be highly difficult to get out to a well to see what's going on if you've got to get your vehicle across a river that's flooded, you know, several metres. And flying in by helicopter is not always possible either. There's not always somewhere dry to land. Another issue that we have with our flooding and with our wet seasons is dams overflow due to the amount of rainfall. This makes fracking ponds an unacceptable risk. We heard Origin this morning speaking about how they don't want to use storage tanks. Storage tanks do have their issues. They can float away if they're not properly anchored or if they're not full. But dams are equally or more so hazardous. And, you know, where it might be great for a pastoralist to have his dam overflow, we definitely don't want fracking dams overflowing. The consequences of that would be catastrophic for our countryside. So to propose that fracking will only take place in the dry season is misleading. You can't pack up your well and take it away and bring it back when the dry arrives. It's there permanently. So, you know, to say that we're not going to frack in the dry season doesn't fully account for all the risks of having the equipment, having partially prepared sites, having the wells all exposed over the course of a wet season and vulnerable to failure as a result. You know, and how will they cope if they're submerged underwater for long periods of time? Nobody seems to know. So that's my discussion on flooding. Now, faults and fractures. There was a new report released last month. It came out in January 2018 called Spatial and Temporal Variation in Detrital Zircon Age Provenance of the Hydrocarbon-Bearing Upper Roper Group Beetaloo Sub-Basin, Northern Territory, Australia. Now, this report attempted to map the faults in the Beetaloo Basin, and from that report I've pulled out map 14 and map 15, which shows they've attempted to map the fault zones and the fault lines in the basin. But this map is far from complete. They've done a pretty good job of trying to map all of those faults and fractures, but they've only really picked up the most obvious major ones. And to demonstrate and highlight the difficulty in picking up faults and fractures, when they were drilling the Amungi NW1H well in Beetaloo, they actually came across a fracture. They drilled through a fracture, and that fracture wasn't known to exist until they drilled through it. And that's shown in the draft final report. Sorry, I forgot to print that map out. It's on page 81 of the draft final report, figure 6.5. And that very clearly shows the fracture that they encountered. And the reason why they encountered that fracture, and the reason why, even though these maps from this latest report show a lot of fractures, it's not extensive, it's not all the fractures, is because geologically speaking, there is no such thing as solid rock. It doesn't exist. The subsurface is a maze of fractured and faulted material. The earth has gone through numerous upheavals and uplifts and all sorts of different processes over the period of the earth creating, and it's resulted in this maze of rocks. In conventional rock strata above a conventional oil or gas reservoir, the materials developed an impermeability that can be observed and it can be trusted to remain as the oil or gas is extracted. The very fact that that reservoir of oil or gas exists as a reservoir is because of the impermeability of that overlaying rock strata. In some cases with these conventional wells, the reservoir requires water injection to replace what's extracted to maintain the integrity of the reservoir and aid the extraction. But in most cases, that observed sealing quality of the overlaying strata of a conventional gas reservoir remains intact. And the only issues they have with those conventional reservoirs really is the issues around the well engineering. Hence the focus in the advice given to you by engineers has all been about how wonderful the well engineering is. But that completely misses the point of the problems that will be encountered in unconventional wells. So with your conventional wells, you have that impermeable layer. That is why that reservoir exists in that place. And that is why those engineers have focused on the well integrity. And a skeptic might say that's intentionally been done with that focus on the wells, because the proposed fracking process that they're talking about doing with shale gas is entirely different to conventional gas. In fracking, there's no proof of impermeability of overlaying strata. The gas is trapped in the shale rock. The shale rock is the impermeable thing holding that gas. And once it's fractured, it's no longer impermeable. So you can't observe the impermeability. There is no reservoir where you can say, yes, there's an impermeable cap holding that oil or gas there. It doesn't exist in unconventional oil and gas bodies, such as the Beetaloo. And trusting that that impermeability exists over shale rock, it's not really an acceptable position. Faults and fractures must be expected as the norm above shale layers proposed for fracking. All and every geologist will say the same thing. They'll all attest to it. It's for this very reason, that you can't get a guarantee from the fracking companies as to the integrity of that overburden, as to the impermeability of that rock. And qualified insurances aren't good enough. We need watertight guarantees. Prove that impermeable layer exists, and they can't prove it because the impermeability comes from the shale itself. And they're going to be fracturing that. So, the draft report supports my presentation today. The draft report states, with all potential onshore shale gas areas in the NT, there is very little information about the nature of deeper groundwater systems, and moreover, there is limited understanding based on deep exploration drilling to date of the deeper geological systems in these basins. And that is the limited understanding. That impermeable layer can't be found to exist if it doesn't exist. The report also found there is significant potential for accidental releases, leaks and spills of hydraulic fracturing chemicals and fluids and flow back and produced water, I'm quoting the report, that could lead to contamination of nearby surface water and seepage through soil profile into shallow aquifers. Now, that significant potential of accidental releases is one of the reasons why flooding is going to be such an issue with the wastewater ponds, and even to a lesser extent with the tanks. And that was further addressed in the risk assessment matrix in Appendix 3, which was unable to determine the risk of unacceptable contamination of groundwater. Hydraulic fracturing for shale gas cannot be permitted to occur under these circumstances of unsurety about that impermeable layer that's quite mythical. And also the unsurety about the flood levels and how are the wastewater ponds going to hold that water. It's all very good for Origin to say that they're going to build the dam walls extra high. Dam walls can erode. We've seen problems with wastewater ponds in almost everywhere else where fracking has occurred. And any risk, and I've said this so many times, and Territorians, we all say this, we're constantly saying this, and we really need to be heard by the government, by everybody, that any risk to our water is just not acceptable and not worth it. Any risk to our water is far too great, and it won't be tolerated. It can't be allowed to happen. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cass. Do we have any questions? Yes, Professor Hart.
Thanks very much, Ms. Cass. Thanks. Taking up the point about flooding,
Yeah.
You've obviously read the report.
Yes.
So, am I correct in assuming that you don't think we've said enough? We certainly indicated the potential of floods. We've got a map there, 1 in 100-year floods.
Think as our climate changes, we're going to get wetter. And we are getting wetter. I mean, it seems like every year we're breaking new records in wetness, in rainfall. And I really don't think it's such a hard thing to measure with the floods. They go up really quick and they go down really quick. So you can be there today and it can be extremely flooded. You can go tomorrow and it might just be a little trickle and ankle deep. And unless those flood levels are constantly being monitored, which they're not constantly monitored, it's very hard to actually know the exact level of flooding unless you talk to the local people. And the local people have been speaking about the flooding, and sometimes For people that aren't living there, for people that haven't experienced it, it's really hard to comprehend. It's hard to comprehend how you can go somewhere and have it look like an absolute desert and go there a short time later and it looks like an inland sea. And I just really don't think that you guys have fully comprehended the extremes of it all and the quickness of it all. And it only needs to be a quick flood to wash a whole heap of contaminants through the countryside.
We'll certainly take that into consideration. I don't agree with you that we haven't, that we don't know about that sort of thing. We may not have articulated it properly or well enough. We've got, I think the Bureau of Met might disagree with your assertion that things are getting wetter. We've got some information there. We've got information.
Many climate scientists would say otherwise.
Oh, come on. For exactly the reason that you brought up. I think climate is changing. It's going to be important. We're talking about the potential of an industry that's likely to be there 40, 50 years if moratoriums. So, look, we've taken that into consideration. I'll take your point that maybe we haven't articulated well enough. We certainly put that in because our whole premise was very much yours, that if government is looking at locations, not just the gas companies, but government in terms of location, they have to consider, even in Beetaloo, in the Beetaloo Sub-basin, they have to consider where floods are likely to occur. So we'll look at it again.
The other thing is, they're going to be altering that landscape and that water flow as well through the process of fracking. But looking at an annual average taken from the 60s to 1990 isn't necessarily the most...
But that was there just to really show the differential from north to south.
Yeah.
We've got other information in there in terms of flooding, and as I say, we'll look at strengthening that.
Thank you. Yeah, it really is something to consider. Any other
questions? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Cass. Just a comment on, a couple of beforehand. Just a comment on experience here. So I've lived in the Territory for 32 years, and so I think do have an idea of the seasonality and rainfall, and other panel members have also lived in the NT for a long period of time. So, I think we do. But I just wanted to pick up on your comments about risk, and I think it's a really important point, and you make the point, and it's a very valid one, that a low risk is not no risk, and absolutely true. And I think we state that in the report. But I just wanted to query you about your comment that for Territorians, if something is of real value to them, like water, any risk is just totally unacceptable.
That's right.
And I just wonder if that is the case, in the sense of, as an example, you'll be driving home after this, I presume, and there's a real risk that you'll get killed in a car accident.
Oh, absolutely.
But you'll do it.
Yes.
And so I think Territorians do have an idea that you can never guarantee anything.
No, but there is a big difference between me having a car accident and me personally dying, which is one person, or affecting an aquifer or a river. I mean, the aquifers under the Beetaloo flow north and they discharge into the Roper, they discharge into the Daly, they discharge into the Catherine. That surface water from the rain all flows into the Victoria River. Now, there's a big difference between me crashing a car and dying, that's one person impacted, to having a whole river system or several river systems or multiple aquifers affected by an industry that wants to extract gas to export it overseas. And really, there is no benefit for us out of that. So why would we risk something that's risking it for all the people, all the animals, all the plants, all the subterranean little wiggly things, everything? Why would we risk that for something that is not needed? I need to get home to my kids, and I'm willing to take the risk for myself because that is only me. I'm not willing to take a risk that impacts the entire Territory, and that is what we're talking about, and that is the difference. Thank you.
That's a very good answer, I might add. Any further questions? But having said this, I do accept what you say. It's not clearly, it's implicitly in the draft final report. It's not clearly expressed, though, I think in a satisfactory way. I did say, or rather I should say, it has been said in the summary of the draft final report that it is to be noted that the strong antipathy surrounding fracking demonstrated during the first round of consultations held by the inquiry was also present during the second round of consultations. For a sizable majority of people attending the public hearings and the community forums, the consensus that hydraulic fracturing for onshore gas in the NT is that it's not safe, it's not trusted, and it's not wanted. So it is there, but I accept that it needs to be more clearly stated in the body of the report, and we will attend to that. But it certainly was stated expressly and, in my view, quite clearly in the summary of the draft final.
I'd like it in the main as well, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So you've given a copy of your papers to the task force?
I'll give it to them right now.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Cass, again.
Could I just
one more?
add, I've just downloaded that paper by Yang.
Excellent, yeah.
And I've sent it around to you all. So we've got it. Thank you very much.
That is how efficient we
How
are
efficient
here
we
at the
are.
inquiry.
And don't forget, Kate's got an email with the link to
Yeah,
that
no, I'll be very keen to
advertising.
have a look at
Got the
that. But
paper.
I might just say thank you as well on behalf of all of the panel for your continuing thorough and dedicated submission and participation with this inquiry. It has been very much appreciated.
Thanks. My submission is still a progress in work. You should get it tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.